thinking about journalists, aren't we? Not just American journalism, journalism anywhere. But here, there's Christopher Hitchens. Well, he's like, how can I describe a young James Cameron. And for British viewers, that should say a lot. Because Jimmy Cameron was the nonpareil of British journalists. He was independent in the truest sense. He was the first one. He was always against the grain, you know, always. Yeah, always.
Jimmy Cameron is the reason I became a journalist.
The what?
Jimmy Cameron is the reason I wanted to become a journalist.
Really?
In 1966, he wrote a piece in the New Statesman about being one and why he was thinking of stopping. But it said all the things he'd done while being a journalist. It said, you know, I've sat with Ho Chi Minh and I was deported from South Africa and I was there listening to Nehru at midnight when India became a free country. And he said, and I've also swum in all the 5 oceans and fucked on all 5 continents. And I thought, works for me. I mean, I think it might possibly be a career path here.
In any event, this is James Cameron, and I think in Christopher Hitchens we have there's continuity involved here. There's certain channels that we can pursue and sail through, narrower channels, channels of journalists we bank on. To say the emperor has no clothes, or if he does, he's a pretty obscene guy anyway. So in a way, that's Christopher Hitchens, and Christopher Hitchens is in that tradition, so of course I'm delighted to always run into him.
Now I'm embarrassed.
Yeah.
What brings you here?
What?
What brings you here?
The White House Correspondents' Dinner.
What's your interest in it?
Huh?
Why are you interested in it?
I come every year, man. Get.
Is that a microphone you got over there?
Sorry?
Is that a microphone?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I'm from Channel 4.
That's a cool one, man.
His name is Versace. And who did your hair? Actually, I did my hair.
And who are you a guest of this evening?
I'm with People Magazine, and I thank them very much for inviting me. It should be a wonderful event.
She's on Alan McBeal, but
Alan McBeal.
What's the fascination between Hollywood and Washington? Why are so many stars coming to this White House?
Oh, I guess it's power, baby. And entertainment.
All in one.
All in one.
Saxon Scandal, there you go. That's the thing. That sells the tickets, right?
To those who make the media, plain people just like me, but who with tools and an image leads society. The world is standing at a threshold that you can see us through. And I cannot help but think of all the good that you could do. And I need to know, I need to know.
In May 1999, while NATO planes were bombing Belgrade, Christopher Hitchens, a British journalist, was touring his latest book around the States. The target of his poison pen was the American president. The title of his book, No One Left to Lie To, The Triangulations of William Jefferson Clinton. Unusually for a left-winger, Hitchens attacked Clinton not just for his warmongering and shafting the poor, but for Clinton's sex life, which Hitchens saw as part and parcel of the president's public corruption. This is a story of American political culture, American media culture, and one stubborn, arrogant Brit who bulldozes through it all. Hitchens started his tour in his hometown of Washington, at an annual dinner which he hates, being feted by right-wing demonstrators who, until he turned on Clinton, would have hated him.
Bad food and groveling, a lousy combination.
Well,
but I'm going to give out some leaflets.
Oh, please do. Please do. This is my one and only success other than the right-wing...
oh, someone's shouting my name through a loud here.
Oh, they love you. They're shouting White House Pimp Corps. What? Pimp Corps.
Stop the madness! Stop the madness!
You're going in the wrong area.
It's a bit more subtle than that.
My love, you're going in the wrong area.
Yeah, oh, okay.
That was very nice of you.
I'm Kristen Taylor.
You are. How nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All of you. How wonderful.
I love you on Washington Journal. I love your brother. I love it when you're both on there together.
You like my brother? You must learn to discriminate.
Walk out. Don't auto this.
It's enough. Sorry,
Walk out.
Thanks for coming over.
It's so great that you exist. It's so wonderful. that you exist, that you exist.
Great with nothingness and with punctuates nastiness.
I feel like this is terrible. I feel like I'm some cunt running for office.
Hey, are you? Yeah. In the office, the only honest journalist in Washington.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
And that was like, I was part of the
Mr. Hitchens!
He's our hero!
Not just a duty, a pleasure. A pleasure.
Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!
This is kind of try men's souls. Tonight, you know, at the radio TV correspondence dinner, which I wouldn't go to, even though he asked me to, the president got a standing ovation when he came in, just for coming in, from the press. He got a standing ovation when he gave up to give his nothing speech, and he got a standing ovation when he sat down having given a nothing speech, and nobody said a fucking word. So I apologize that I'm going to this. I kind of have to. This is the last time. No, because if I don't go, people will say I funked it. If I don't come, people will say I was avoiding combat. So I decided I have to do it.
Carry the
It's my last year.
Carry the fight forward.
It's my last year.
This is stuff you wanted printed out.
That's fantastic. Thank you very
It's
much.
a whole bunch of kind of stuff.
Thank you. Well, no, it's a privilege.
Right.
Well, sorry.
It's a privilege.
Yeah, fight the good fight, Chris. Really do.
Outstanding.
Well, isn't it wonderful when all the questioners, all the hostile ones are incoherent?
I want to thank you for everything you've done.
Oh, hey, thank you. Thank you for saying so. It's nothing but a pleasure.
On behalf of every good American who wishes to live in a free country
It is an honor.
instead of a dictatorship, which is what we're moving towards.
As you know, Mr. Franklin said,
What's that?
a republic if you can keep it. A republic if you can keep it.
The free republic! The free republic! The free republic!
Thank you, Chris! 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 Thank you, Christopher Hitchens, a patriot.
Have a leaflet. This is the London Times.
Good evening.
Good God, how wonderful.
How you doing?
Don't tell me you came for this.
No, we're here now.
When did you
You're living here.
I left a message for you.
No, not a word. Honestly, I'm terribly sorry.
No, ages ago. No, we moved about a month ago.
These people who were heroes just can't cut it anymore. It's up to you and me to tear their posters from our doors. When you were tired of hanging out, they drove you home. Now you've seen inside the car. I wish I'd leave you alone. Don't try to pretend. Say it's not up to me. Hey, like everything you see walking down the street, your life is making believe. Hey, making believe. Hey, you do and receive someday. And you fly in color. You're gonna come through. Someday and you fly in color. I wanna see you. Don't wanna be rich. No, don't wanna be poor no more. And if you pay me something,
We don't want to miss the toast. Salud. Shalom. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Best. And freedom or death.
There you go.
You know who Jessica Mitford was? You know about her sisters?
No.
Oh, well. Oswald Moses became the British fascist, this brilliant socialist. Well, of course, Mussolini was socialist too, but that's not it. That's because
Yeah, became a national.
But her sisters, one was the girlfriend of Hitler, Unity, who killed herself. Their father was a parson. And out of this came Jessica. And she married
Esmond Romilly.
Churchill's nephew.
She ran away with Esmond Romilly, who was Churchill's nephew, to
Romilly,
Spain.
who was killed in the Spanish Civil... No, he's killed in the Canadian Air
He was
Force.
killed in Canadian Air Force.
Canadian Air Force.
She was... I used to speak sometimes with her at meetings, and she introduced me for the Mother Teresa book and several readings. And in fact, I got the idea of calling it a missionary position from a conversation with her. There was something she said, I suddenly... but she was brilliantly funny, but she... I always would, when I introduced her, I always say, I have a terrible grudge against Decca Mitford, and I better make it public.
Yeah.
Because she, when she found out that two of her sisters were regularly going to stay with Hitler at Berchtesgaden for country house weekends, and they kept saying, oh, Decca, darling, you must come. He's so sweet. The Fuhrer would completely charm you. She suddenly thought, I know what I'll do. I'll say yes. And I'll take a little Derringer gun in my wrap. And the moment I presented this ghastly Führer of theirs, I'm going to shoot him. And she made all the plans for it and got herself invited. And at the last minute, she couldn't go through with it. And I said, Decker, you are silly. Think of all the trouble you could have saved us. You are a frightful funk, aren't you? And she would say, and she'd sit there and say, yes, I know, it was rather sort of wet on me, I know.
I like that. The annual Project Censored award ceremony in New York brings together some of the finest dissident journalists in America. They're constantly reminding the American public of the evils of multinational corporations and of injustices being perpetrated far away from American TV screens in East Timor, Nigeria, and the suburbs of Washington, D.C. They don't care much for Clinton, but they care even less for Kenneth Starr.
Clinton is part of the machine that is Democrats, Republicans, it doesn't matter. It's all one establishment block of government that's corporations and all that. And people might have a fantasy that Clinton can be a better alternative than, say, Bush. You know, incrementally it may be true, and we try to stay optimistic as much as possible, but as far as, you know, harassing Clinton about his sex life or something like that is total smokescreen, and you know, we'd be better off, you know, harassing Clinton for his, you know, warmongering or something like that than his, you know, drop trow.
Not once, but 3 times last year, Bill Clinton ordered the use of cruise missiles against remote and unpopular countries. On each occasion, the dispatch of the missiles coincided with bad moments in the calendar of his long and unsuccessful struggle to avoid impeachment. No one needs to die of meningitis, but in Sudan people still are, because the definition of underdevelopment is a country that has only one of everything: one airport, one radio station, one pharmaceutical plant. And that plant in Sudan was blown up by Mr. Clinton to save his face. The face, this face to be precise. Is there only a Hollywood link between Clinton's carnality and Clinton's carnage? Was our culture hit by weapons of mass distraction?
I think the mainstream media on Clinton, you know, they go up and down. On Monica, they were completely wrong. They were wrong in every single way. And it was great to see them so wrong. I mean, they were all saying there'll be impeachment. When it first came out, they'll say, you know, he's likely to last 3 days. There'll be impeachment within the week. There'll be impeachment certainly within the month. He can't possibly survive. The country won't stand it. If the country finds out he lies, they'll never tolerate it. America is a family values, moralistic kind of place. There's no room for adultery. There's no room for sex in the office. Well, then they find that there's lots of room for adultery and lots of room for sex in the office, and good thing too, because at least people aren't hypocrites.
You say I shouldn't have said carnality if I didn't want to be accused of Old Testament values. I said, is the carnality related to the carnage? That's all. The word, the common Latin cognate root is carne, flesh, that's all. What kind of fleshliness was the president engaged in? And I was arguing with those who say we should care about his bombing strangers and not about him humping comfort women on the staff. As to the respective filth of one's emissions, I mean, Lewinsky had to be persuaded not to take it to the laundry, which I think means she thought it was dirty. But I will say, I will put myself in the right-wing camp to this extent. I have never met Linda Tripp. I've often been compared to with her. And we have apparently the same difficulty in attracting male suitors. This is what you get for stirring me up, by the way. But I will say I cannot thank her enough. I cannot thank her. I think everyone in this room is enormously in her debt for persuading Lewinsky to keep that dress, because if she had not, everyone in this room would at least have heard, and more than half of you would believe, that Miss Lewinsky was a blackmailing hussy and a minx and a psycho and a stalker, which was the line they were putting out on her, with your money, on your dime, in government time, to do what they'd done to so many women before, to defame them, to cheapen them, to trample on them, to destroy their reputations, and to secure their perjury. And yes, I'm afraid you would have believed it, and I might have believed it myself. And thanks to the vile jizz, we're in the clear.
While Hitchens was in LA, a news story hit the fan. Salih Idris, the owner of the Sudanese pharmaceutical plant which Clinton had destroyed, was suing the American government.
The Treasury Department yesterday and the Defense Department yesterday came into open court in Washington and said, we drop it. We no longer say that the owner of that factory that Mr. Clinton blew up in Sudan last August is a terrorist. We no longer say his factory made nerve gas. We admit it made only pharmaceuticals for the poor of Sudan, who have been dying every day up to today, ever since that factory was blown up. We no longer say that the factory was owned by Mr. Osama bin Laden. We no longer make any of these claims. We give it up. And it got on page A18 of the San Francisco Chronicle yesterday. I don't know where it was on the LA Times. Nowhere at all? No. Surprise me. Every single claim they made. And I had to face them every day, because I've been writing it since August last year. I said, Mr. Clinton blew that factory up, didn't he? He didn't consult the Joint Chiefs, did he? He wouldn't even ask the CIA, would he? That's not very often. Or the FBI, or Congress, or the National Security Council, or anyone at all, because it was a piece of presidential caprice. You take every other explanation, right down to why he didn't give the Sudanese any warning. We have diplomatic relations with Sudan. It's a sovereign country. You can't just drop cruise missiles into a poor and unpopular country, even if it is in Africa, just like that. And you're left with only one thing, which is that Monica Lewinsky was going back to the grand jury that day.
Wag the dog, right? Wag the dog.
Just before the Lewinsky affair became public, in January 1998, there was a New York pre-screening party for Barry Levinson's movie Wag the Dog, written by Hilary Hankin and David Mamet. By depicting a phony president starting a phony war in order to distract attention from his filthy lunge at a beret-wearing cupcake, this film became the political and celluloid equivalent of a Clintonian Ramon Aclé. So it's for you to decide, as voters, taxpayers, citizens, whatever you might be, whether you think that cost is worth that face, because what I've been trying to say for some time now is that it's not worth it. And that anyone who would consider even risking the life of a child to save that face, or to save you, the trauma that you all wanted to be spared of having such a person removed from office, is taking a grave moral risk that they're not really entitled to take. So my quarrel really is with you, as far as you constitute the public opinion that saved that face, okay?
Clinton was elected with a large majority. Most of the liberals in America, self-described liberals, if such a thing still exists, support Clinton. When you go and call him a scumbag, and you poison the debate so that you sound almost like the extreme right, even if you're not, I think that you estrange your perspective from the perspectives of a lot of people who need to be challenged in being uncritically supportive of Clinton.
Could it be there's a reptile in the nest? Could it be that it's really true that as President of the United States, leader of the free world, Chief Magistrate, Commander-in-Chief, occupant of the Oval Office, there is a rapist, a serial rapist, a war criminal and a psychopathic liar? The fact that Mr. Clinton had a sex life that was entirely in tune with being a war criminal, a psychopathic liar, and now, as we know, a serial rapist, made them think, well, surely this is a private matter and just a matter of identity politics, really. I mean, everyone's got to do something. He does serial rape. This is a mistake. I wrote my book, it's a pamphlet, really, in argument against this naive view, and I haven't had to take anything back. I stand before you as someone who's been proved right, who isn't ashamed to say so, who was correct when everyone else was incorrect. And who has no intention of not milking the fact.
So I think Hitchens' anger sometimes has overtaken him. His frustration, I think, by living in Washington and being exposed to that environment has produced a very harsh reaction, a counter reaction to it. And it just shows, you know, if you work in a whorehouse, you're going to get fucked.
Hitch's war cry of rapist is based largely on the testimony of Juanita Broderick, a nursing home supervisor who reluctantly revealed to NBC that Bill Clinton had raped her in 1978.
There isn't the remotest possibility, in my opinion, that Juanita Broderick is not telling the truth. Some people are content to say, well, it's not provable, and anyway, it's her word against his. Her story was known to a very small group of people, one of whom attempted to make it public a long time ago over her objections. She didn't want to revisit the subject. Who gave her own testimony only when it was going to be, when it was plain to her that others would tell her story, were telling it, and if it was to be told properly, it should be told by her. So that's the thing about her word, right? No motive to lie. Okay, so that's her word. What's his word? He hasn't said anything. Right? He refuses to say anything. Many people think he's denied it. Hasn't denied it. When asked, which is not very often, he has referred people to a complete hack lawyer called David Kendall, who didn't know him that year. And as far as I know, has never been to Arkansas. The statement made by Mr. Kendall reads as follows. There's no truth in the accusation that the president physically assaulted Juanita Broderick. Why do they say physically assaulted her, right? The charge is not he smacked her around or got impatient with her and gave her maybe a love tap. The charge is that he bit her till she lay still and then fucked her, which she didn't want him to do, which is rape, right? Furthermore, Mr. Clinton was Attorney General of Arkansas in that year, and it is quite possible for him to say where he was that day. The records are pretty good. Well, could you have been there? NBC asked him, Mr. President, were you in Little Rock even that day? Can you help us decide where you were? No. White House says, we're not helping you to find out. NBC has a lot of resources. They found out he could easily have been where she said he was that day. If you will consult, I think it's page 234 of Roger Morris's book, Partners in Power, Roger Morris, formerly of the National Security Council, you'll find an account, it's bodyguarded by anonymity, but I know who she is, of a woman describing exactly the same method of operation, being bitten until she cooperated. And I think I know of at least one other who can make the same claim. And NBC did a very good job. It's just that when they'd done the interview with her, they realized, good God, everything she says checks out. Every single thing. They thought, now what are we going to do? Because there's an impeachment trial going on. If we show it now, we've got a real story on our hands. Well, believe you me, you may think that the mass media is only interested in ratings and sensation and profit, but that's not true. They are very interested in those things, but they're much more interested in safeguarding the political consensus. And political consensus would have been shattered by NBC airing a rape allegation against a sitting president during his trial. So it was aired after the trial was over. We live in a society where consensus is considered a very high, in fact, the highest value. And if you wanted to be part of the consensus, then you had to say that sex was consensual too. Otherwise, you were an extremist and a marginal person, as I stand before you.
The notion that there's a cloying consensus between Republicans and Democrats, Tories and Labour, on most of the substantial issues of modern politics. In LA, Hitch had loud competition from a follower of Lyndon LaRouche, a neo-fascist cult leader who believes that the British Crown, in association with assorted Jews and communists, is the source of all evil.
The question about Mr. Clinton is my subject for the evening, can we have one speaker at a time? I mean, I'm willing to. No, okay, I don't mind actually. We can have a debate. Steve and I remember when rallies were unstructured, and we still have some moves left in us, in case you wonder.
You speak, we can hear him all the time, so.
Yeah, we don't have to hear LaRouche again.
If it's LaRouche, then.
Fearless leader, Lynn. Yes. Go ahead.
Well.
Either you shut up or we get you out, okay?
911. I already called the cops with this guy, so he's just 911 right
Look, it would be a sad day in America if you needed the police to deal with a bedraggled member of a Nazi cult organization. Surely, it seemed to me that would be some kind of defeat. When Mr. Ronald Reagan used to borrow bad lines from crap movies, usually involving the worst sort of sex and the nastier kind of violence, everybody knew when to laugh and how, and were very consensual with one another about that. But when it actually happens that you get a Stanley Kubrick president who will use phallocratic cruise missiles really to solve his court calendar and to clear the decks of his nasty harassment cases and what goes with them, there wasn't a single liberal in the country who knew how to say a goddamn fucking word. And that's what I'm facing you with. You all know how to laugh at the people. What are you doing for them? What are you doing for them by your silence? Did the Nation say anything about Clinton doing this? Not a squeak. Did the New Yorker, did the New Republic, did Dissent, did the New York Times op-ed page? No, I know they didn't. That would be true even if various paranoid nutcases had tried to chime in when it was too late. Because not even that would save the credit of liberalism, would it? And I'm sure that's not your purpose, sir, so you might as well keep your place. Or look like more of a damn fool than you do already. He thinks his timing is so great. Woof. So that's where I want to begin. The point is, I know what, everybody knows what your stupid paper is called. Everybody knows what your damn paper is called, so. Yeah, believe me, it's not from lack of knowledge that people don't support your leader. You know that, no, George, leave him alone, leave him alone. No, come on, he couldn't, no, come on. I wouldn't piss on him if he was on fire. Come on. Come on, leave him alone. Officer.
Tony Blair, not you. You should be denouncing Tony Blair with every...
Officer, he's observing the rule. The poor sap. Actually, one more thing out of you, and I won't call the police, I wouldn't do that. I'll take you out myself, okay? And if you don't believe me, try me. Go on, try me. All right, that's it. Come out with me now. Come out with me now, or hold your fucking peace.
Keep your mouth shut.
We need the police to leave.
Come on, Brian. I'll bring him my hand.
Let him do it. Christopher knows what he's doing. Hey, Brian, out of respect, do it.
You don't take shit. You are shit. What do you mean you don't take shit? How would you know?
Shit, but I don't take shit from subjects of the Queen.
I'm offering you my arm, I'll take you out.
You are a dual subject citizen.
I'm offering you my arm, I'll take you out. I'll take you out.
I don't want to go out.
I'll take you out.
Then you have to shut up.
Hey, Brian.
This is a dossier on you.
This will not be on page one of the LA Times tomorrow.
You're going to stay, you're going to suffer for it. You're going to say you're going to suffer. You lose your hat, you lose your paper. Come out.
Hold on. Get up for a minute. Brian, you know me, right? Yes, sir. This guy's on for a breath of fresh air.
Let them talk to him. Let them talk.
I tried to be funny. I tried to be funny. I love hecklers. There has to be one of them in the meeting. It's awful that we
Come on. All right, I'm not going to be dragged out.
Okay, and now you know, I offered him my arm.
Can I have my hat?
Take my arm or we'll go.
Took my hat.
You'll go for the cops. You'll go for the cops. You're a worthless jerk. If you had any courage, you wouldn't go for the cops.
Have a good night, sir.
Okay, you're a worthless, cowardly jerk.
Yeah.
You wouldn't take my arm to go out, and you'll go like a lamb with the cops. You're a fucking jerk. You're useless, you don't count. Imagine that this guy thinks he's a revolutionary. Like a lamb.
Not on camera? Jack? Jack, I think you should tell English Channel 4 in Britain about the mechanism you've discovered to travel through time.
Shouldn't we diddle a vagina with this first?
What is he calling it?
There's a few pubic hairs on this.
Rolling Stones or Beatles? Rolling Stones or Beatles? That's the question of the evening that I didn't get to ask you.
Finally, Dusty Springfield.
Of course, but no, I'm talking men now.
Dusty Springfield.
You can talk men all you like.
I would like to, but I'm talking about Rolling Stones versus Beatles. You have to come down one way or the other.
Street fighting man, or I want to hold your hand.
Okay.
Give me shelter.
Okay, no.
This could determine the
Paint it on the outside of the Village Voice on a certain day in 1980, I think, was it? Why is it always John Lennon and Bobby Kennedy? Why is it never Richard Nixon or Paul McCartney?
Together. Not good enough.
No, but I thought that was a false antithesis.
Have you noticed how that Beatles song Come Together has been
Bobby Kennedy is a scumbag and
dead.
Blah blah. So it was, but you understand the ethos was good.
I'm with you, Christopher.
It's a.
It was good.
You have not
it showed the right spirit. I think.
corporations?
I think Not Fade Away decides it.
Their official logic.
Okay? Not Fade Away and Give Me Shelter decides it.
Thank you.
Rape, murder, it's just a kiss away.
Not only haven't they been
John and Paul would never have accomplished that.
No.
So, okay, now you know what I
Okay, good.
think. Just a kiss away. Rape, murder, just a shot away.
Bobby Kennedy isn't the only popular hero Hitch lays into. In another book for the left-wing publisher Verso, The Missionary Position, he portrayed Mother Teresa as a religious fundamentalist who hobnobbed with dictators, took stolen money from financial scammers like the American Charles Keating, and spent that money on gilded ecclesiastical trinkets rather than on painkillers to relieve the noble suffering of her charges.
Sometimes I feel he takes a kind of contrarian view, which is very finely etched, maybe as a way to get even more attention for his ideas, you know. Everybody loves Mother Teresa, he hates her. Everybody is into the Dalai Lama, he's, you know, critiquing the Dalai Lama. People are, for Clinton, he's against Clinton.
It's hardly a new act. I think it has more currency because of the elegant accent and that tone of condescension that people respond to. They love feeling put down.
My book is written as an attack on you, which is why I hope you will buy it at fine bookstores everywhere. And pass it on to your rotten families and your compromising friends.
Is it simply an iconoclastic voice that basically says, fuck you, to everyone? You know, I'm right. And that can lead to a lot of self-righteousness. You know, with people in the women's movement are very suspicious, if you will, about Christopher's flip stance sometimes. I don't think that he's a, sexist pig, but I don't think he's always as sensitive as he might be to the concerns of his colleagues.
I don't find Hitchens' politics particularly left, particularly enlightening, particularly original. I mean, he seems to make a career out of knocking women. I mean, what he said about Mother Teresa is hardly original. We all knew that she was a stooge of Charles Keating. I mean, she testified at his trial, for God's sakes. One week he's describing Princess Diana as the most dim-witted of the royals, and then a couple of weeks later he's talking about what a great Republican she was. I think Hitchens regards Clinton as an honorary woman, and so they then come into that category. I don't think he sees him as a fully male, but as a sort of feminized male in some way. I think the term in English would be pussy whipped. And so he gets the same treatment as the rest of them. I certainly don't think that Hitchens' views on questions like abortion, contraception, women's rights are anything out of the 13th century.
Hitchens attracts such vitriol from his own camp because, like some other dissident leftists, he's highly critical of identity politics. It's since the 60s that questions of race and gender have become as important to the left as that old bogey class.
Christopher Hitchens is just a voice in the wilderness that really resonates for me, so it was really great to hear.
You gotta go back to the pre-60s left to read voices like that. Even in fiction, you have to check out John Dos Passos, and
that's how far back you have to
and he's that's what makes him so refreshing.
This newfangled identity politics has been used by populist charlatans of all political colours and all skin colours. Clinton pacified the left and hid his betrayals of gays, women and blacks by trumpeting his supposed devotion to the concerns of gays, women and especially African Americans. Similarly, supporters of the reactionary black judge, Clarence Thomas, deflected attention from his extreme views and his alleged harassment of a female subordinate by claiming that he was a victim of a high-tech lynching, language that was lost on no one.
The forces of really vulgar reaction and really vulgar exploitation and vulgar manipulation were being safeguarded by different versions of political correctness.
It really is the culture wars. They will support Clinton because they see him as a bulwark against the right. For a lot of women's groups, I'd say for Patricia Ireland, who just completely capitulated, it's all about abortion. It's all about abortion rights. That looms so large, and the fear is so great that if the right gets control, they'll lose that anything is forgivable. Anything is
and their integrity is polluted by the association. It's over. Because everybody's bullshit detector goes off. It's all about that. It's about the abandonment of any kind of judgment. The left is responsible for somehow taking judgment off the table. The right is judgmental. We're not. That is an example of leftist judgment And that's what's been taken off the table since the 60s. And
Well,
you can't be
I'll give you an
judgmental.
example of that written small. Clarence Thomas.
The most qualified candidate
the
for
left
the job.
and the black community put him in there because what they gave him the cover.
You can't judge
because when the shit got thick and the professor got on the stand, the conservative Democrats, and there were still a few that held the balance, looked to the southern black community, and they turned away. They blinked. They said, "He's a black man. He's a very black man," which was the key.
Yeah.
He's very black. He's African looking. Right? We support him. He can't really mean what he said.
The legacy,
he can't really
that,
mean what he
that
wrote.
is the legacy
And I'm
of the
screaming,
60s left
he
in
does
action
mean it
right
for
there.
crying out loud. He's bad for us. Don't support this guy. If you turn away from him, they've got no political cover. They will have to vote against him. Don't support him. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They were so color-struck that they had to support him. They put him in, not the right. The black community put him in because they wouldn't turn away from him.
Identity politics can be done better by the extreme right. A point that's been proved in Yugoslavia as well, by the way, recently. And that's what, of course, the feminist movement has got for itself. The feminist movement, you know who I mean. Betty Friedan lives in my building. I see her every day. It's a shame. She shouldn't have ended up like this, as saying that Clinton's the victim of sexual McCarthyism. That's a pathetic end. That's a really dismal end. Okay, she borrowed it from The Nation, which has taken a generally cretinous view of this from the start. But she shouldn't be borrowing stuff from The Nation. She should think for herself, as all nation people should learn to do.
I myself, want to get conversations like the one he has amongst smaller groups. He's the superstar, I'm just the groupie. What does it say about us as a country if we are infatuated with Mother Teresa's and Princess Diana's and Dalai Lama's and Bill Clinton's, or audiences like this? Because what we do to Bill Clinton, kind of like, oh, here he is, Mr. President, he's getting from this audience a kind of uncritical acceptance. And he's working against that. I think he did a good job of not, taking it to his head there.
What? Oh, there is no hope for the left. There's no hope for the left as long as questions like that can be asked of someone like me. I mean, if you're asking me, then there is no hope for the left. You might want to think of an answer rather than a question there. And I think the first rule would be the one I never tire of, which is the one of Eugene Debs, which is don't ask that. Don't be a follower. Don't look for a leader. If he could lead you into the promised land, he could lead you out. Do your own thinking. And dispense with these characters who, with SDI and with Serbia and with China and with all these other countries, show that they think of you as completely dispensable statistics, as people who are disposable and so on, and learn instead to think of the leaders in the same way as they think of you. That would be progress. That would be progress.
Are you conscious of something missing?
Yeah, what's missing is I wish more of us were writing or putting together these stories ourselves, and we're a little less, I guess, passive in the construction of the stories. And that, there's nothing in this book that he hasn't written about elsewhere, and yet he